Alright, I'm going to go ahead and call this painting finished. Some of the things that I've been working on, I decided to go ahead and change some of these reflections, as I mentioned in the last video. In my photo reference, there are reflections more for some specific individual trees, but I decided that I wanted to just kind of mass those together a little bit more, which de-emphasizes it and kind of gives a reflection for this whole tree area, and I like it better. I think that it's a definite improvement over the way that I had it before. The main thing that I've been working on is this large tree right here, which is the focal point. I wanted to mention something about that color. So I started with my shadow mixture, or my dark mixture, which is cadmium yellow light, Prussian blue, and quinacridone rose. And then to that I added more yellow, which made the mixture green. And then I added burnt sienna and more red, some more quinacridone rose. And actually a surprising amount of burnt sienna and quinacridone rose. And I think that the reason for that is you have this really yellowish light that is going to be hitting those highlight areas, and so even and under ordinary daylight conditions, you actually have quite a bit of red in those trees, a surprising amount of red and or burnt sienna, but in this case it's even more that way because of the light that's hitting it. So it's actually kind of a rust color. It is green, but it's a very neutral green. It's almost brown. And by using that color, that helps to have this tree and this tree come forward a bit more than the trees in the background. So the trees in the background are a lot more purplish blue. I actually used that same color, and I put a little bit of that color into this area right in here as well, and a tiny bit over here, and even a little bit over here as well. To kind of help those trees to come forward from the really distant ones in the background, but not very much. There's just a tiny bit of that in those. For the most part, it's going to be in this large tree right here, and that helps it to come forward. It gives you that nice feeling of atmospheric perspective. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that for this painting, I feel like there's a nice strong feeling of light and shadow, and so I wanted to mention one of the ways that I was able to get that. The biggest thing to keep in mind for this particular painting is that this sky area right here is actually the lightest value in the painting, and of course the water reflects that as well. But it was really important to make sure that for this painting the sky area was lighter than the snow. Now it's possible in other scenes where you have direct sunlight on snow that the snow could be a lighter value than the sky, but for this particular painting that was not the case because the snow is completely in shadow. So it was really important to make sure that it reads that way. So the way that I actually got the snow mixture was I just used my shadow mixture, and then I used white to make it lighter. But I didn't use any yellow. It was really important to make sure that you have that separation of we have a yellowish or orangey yellow light, and then you have more of a bluish purple shadow area. So that's what you have in the snow, and then for the lightest areas, that's where I would put that kind of orangey yellow. And I think because of that, you have not only the value that's helping it to read correctly, but also you have that nice complementary color scheme of having orangish yellow in the light regions, and then purplish blue in the shadow areas. So I think all of that makes a difference in helping it to read correctly. If there was one thing that I would change about the painting, if I could, I wish that I had actually moved the top of this large tree down just a little bit. I'd like it if it was maybe about 1/4 of an inch shorter. And the reason for that, I actually like the way that it looks right now, but the reason for that is that if the painting is ever framed, if I were to frame it or somebody else were to frame it, then my worry is that the frame actually comes down about 1/4 of an inch lower than the edge of the canvas, so the frame might actually be touching the top of that tree or really close to touching it, which is not ideal. So I've thought about changing that, but I ultimately decided against it because I actually, of course, I didn't notice it until I put really thick paint up there. That seems like it's always like that, right? I usually don't frame paintings, so I didn't think about it, I guess. But I don't want to change it at this point because one of the things that I like about this particular painting is that there's a nice contrast between the sky and the trees, and you don't have any muddiness there. Sometimes when you change the trees a lot up in the sky area, that sky color mixes with the tree color, and if you're not careful, it can get very muddy. That's what happens. That's the risk that you run, and what you're always dealing with when you're painting wet into wet. So even if I scraped it off, my worry is that if I change it while it's still wet, that it could get really muddy up in there, and I would lose that feeling that I have right now where you see a distinct difference between the sky color and the tree, and the sky color around the tree is no different than anywhere else. Sometimes you see even like brush strokes and stuff, and it can get really muddy if you're not careful. So I'm worried that I'm going to lose that if I try to change it while it's still wet. Now maybe I could wait until it dries completely and then paint over, but since it's already really thick, even if you painted over it, you might still be able to see some of that paint underneath, which is also not great. And I would probably have a hard time matching that sky color exactly because a wet paint is going to look differently than the dry paint. So I would probably end up just repainting the sky completely. And if I repaint the sky, then I'm probably going to have to redo some of the things on the clouds. I would probably have to repaint this ridge line here, and maybe even this ridge line as well, at least the top edge of it, because I would have to bring that color all the way down and then repaint the ridge line over the top of that. And it could just end up being a real mess where it actually, I run a serious risk of really messing it up, actually. And so I don't think it's worth it. I'm not going to frame it, and so I guess if somebody else frames it, they're going to have to maybe figure that out, use a different framing option, or maybe get a custom frame where the edge of the frame doesn't come down quite as far or something. But I guess at this point, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to call it finished and feel pretty good about it. So I hope that watching these videos has given you some ideas and that it can help you in your own painting projects. Good luck in your own painting.